Before we move, let us introduce all our esteemed member about the GCTC. So the Global Counter-Terrorism Council is a non-profit international think tank which was started by a few spirited individuals, primarily with to raise the issues of national interest and global conscience. Of course, the terrorism and the human securities. So we have a large number of people from different faculties, bureaucrats, academicians, armed forces, paramilitary forces, distinguished diplomats, researchers, media analysts, professionals, corporate heads, and all those who are part of this esteemed organization and contributing in their capacity to the GCTC. Let's move to the today's topic. As all the esteemed members know, the Chinese and Indian boundary dispute has been quite long, more than 70 years long, and which has led to a major war and several skirmishes in various sectors. The summers of 2020 were very crucial, and it was critical because that was the time when Chinese started having a simultaneous kind of transgressions into the various sectors of Eastern Ladakh. They moved their forces in Pangong So, Hot Spring, Galwaan, Pungrang Nala, Dapsang also, and all these places in maybe in the south Pangong So. But the incident which has changed a lot of things has happened in Galwaan on this very 1 year back, when 20 Indian bravehearts who were patrolling at PP-14 were attacked by the Chinese forces who were armed with the clubs and swords and spears, and very much in number than our forces. The boys fought for over 6 hours, and unfortunately we lost 20 of them, including the commanding officer, Colonel Santosh Babu, Mahavir Chakra. So this has raised another kind of debate with us. A lot of water has flown into the Shyok River ever since then. And now not only India, but the global powers are also able to understand that what has been the ultimate motive of China. I remember a share of Ram Prasad Bismil, है लिए हथियार बैठा ताक में दुश्मन उधर और हम तैयार हैं सीना लिए अपना इधर खून से खेलेंगे होली घर वतन मुश्किल में है सरफरोशी की तमन्ना हमारे दिल में है. So that was a jazba which our boys were carrying on while fighting the Chinese forces in Galwaan. So we at this August gathering are now going to discuss a very important topic. 1 year after Galwaan face-off, Indian and the global perspective. The first session would be about Indian perspective, and I'll be taking on for this session. This time, let me introduce you to the speakers of this forum. Let me share a sheet. Give me a moment. So the session chair of this session would be Joyita Basu. Joyita has been a prominent journalist and does not need an introduction. She is currently the editor of the Sunday Guardian. Among the speakers, we have Dr. Kamal Sibal. He is a distinguished career diplomat who retired as a Foreign Secretary of India and been awarded with a Padma Shri for his distinguished service in the field of public affairs. We have General Syed Atas Naim, who commanded 15 Corps, 21 Corps, and also been the Military Secretary of India from the elite 4 Garhwal Rifles. We have Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. General Sharma commanded the 14 Corps, the corps which is looking after the entire Eastern Ladakh. He has been a research fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and he's also a fellow at the National War College in Nigeria. We have Lieutenant KJ Singh, who has been the General Officer Commanding of Western Command. He has been conferred with the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Chair of Excellence in Punjab University, and also was appointed as the advisor to Chief Minister Haryana in November 2018. We have Lieutenant General Arun Sahni. He's a decorated soldier with over 40 years of service with the Indian Army, and he was commanding a command prior to leaving his forces, and also been adjutant general of the Indian Army. We have Professor Soren Singh, who is a professor and chair, Center for International Politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also president of Association of Asia Scholars and has written several papers on that. He supervised 32 PhDs and 54 MPhil degrees, considered as an expert on Asian affairs. In the first session, we also have Professor Ritusha Tiwari, who is a visiting fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and also an associate professor at Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. She is a PhD in Chinese Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and currently doing a lot of research on Asia and China. So with this, I would like to hand over the session to Joyita to take it forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, GCTC, for asking me to, inviting me to chair this session. Of course, I'm a pygmy, when compared to the speakers that you have, but let me just introduce a little bit about the topic. And when we are talking about, you see, 1 year of Galwaan Valley, it has been a 1 year of Galwaan Valley clash between Indian and Chinese soldiers. The first search that resulted in the death of 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown but possibly a very high number of Chinese soldiers. Now, can we call Galwaan a watershed moment in terms of India-China relationship? And because you see, when we are looking back, what we notice is that before Galwaan, our relationship has been about managing our differences with China. I mean, that has been the fundamental principle on which we have based our relationship, that yes, we have lots of differences, but if we can manage, there can be manage the relationship. We can find certain common grounds where we can meet and we can carry on as if it is business as usual, as if the border dispute does not matter. But you see, what happens with the problem with managing situations, the problem with managing differences is that, you know, sooner or later, the differences tend to blow up in a manner that it becomes uncontrollable. And what happened in Galwaan was exactly that. It was kind of a tipping point. Okay, earlier also it had happened. We were about to reach the tipping point. We did not reach the tipping point, but with Galwaan, what happened was that the failure of the concept of managing differences that came in the forefront. Now, you see, throughout when we look back into our our relationship with China, it has always been, we have justified, quote unquote, justified many of China's transgressions by pointing at the need to maintain some sort of an equilibrium along the 3,000-kilometer border that we share with them. Now, but the problem is, you see, this has not prevented Doklam, Tumar, and Galwaan. So the whole futility of this, you know, staying quiet about China, not talking about, say, the Hong Kong, what China did to Hong Kong, what China is doing to Tibet, just because we share such a long border and we are worried about this thing will flare up, has not really helped us. And frankly, as a citizen of the world's largest democracy, I find it absolutely unacceptable that, for example, when China went on, this is recent memory, we don't know, we don't remember, I mean, we were not even born actually when China, this Tibet thing happened, Tibet, when China occupied Tibet. But what we see in recent memory, we see India's complete silence when it comes to, say, for example, Hong Kong. And that is really offensive for us. The way democracy was muzzled in Hong Kong, at the most what we did, we gave a very oblique statement. But I think that is rather shameful. And being quiet, willing to compromise has not helped us in any way. China is as malign a power as it was. China is as intent in showing India its place. China wants to keep India tied down with Pakistan. China knows that India is a threat. China knows that India can be a manufacturing base. So China wants to keep India in a hole. And it will go do everything possible to keep us there so that we do not realize our potential. So frankly, we are not going to speak about China. Our lips are sealed. China may be doing a lot of things, has not helped us at all. So frankly, that is one thing I think it is high time we shed that. But you see, what has happened post Galwaan is that one good thing I would say is that, certain steps that India has taken, steps in terms of the app ban. App ban was something that was very effective, that even the US could not do it. That we banned TikTok and all, the US, there is so much resistance to it. It really sent out a message to the world that yes, you can stand up to China. Then, for example, I would say the Huawei case. Okay, all these things, until I would say Galwaan, what had happened was that there was a very strong possibility of Huawei coming into our 5G space. But after Galwaan, I would say that is why I'm talking in terms of the watershed moment. Public opinion, political leadership, I think that their sentiments kind of came together and we were able to block. We know what is, say, for example, going on in the West. Say, for example, countries like Canada and all, they're having so much problem. They are not being able to eliminate. They're still fighting. They're activists over there. They're people who are working in the anti-China space over there. They're really fighting, trying to get Huawei out. We cannot possibly give our metadata and China's metadata, artificial intelligence. It's 33% of the world's metadata. China has that. China has a huge advantage in the area of artificial intelligence. So it is very good that we have woken up to this threat, and we have, let's hope we have finally been able to stop Huawei and all. And we have, in spite of that, in spite of the penetration that China has in our telecom sector and several other areas. So I think what has happened in terms of Galwaan really opened our, really helped us to take a particular direction, which I would say the rest of the world has not yet been able to do, not even the developed countries. Now, when we are looking at China, but at the same time, we still hear in India voices about the potential of India-China partnership. Now, when we are talking about the potential of India-China partnership, the fundamental problem, I would say, is in the language. Partner. China is not a partner. Okay, China cannot be a partner. China is not even our rival, or we are not even China's rival. China is not even our competitor. We have to be very clear. When it comes to language, let's be very clear about it. China is our enemy and nothing less than that. And China has been behaving in a manner, because you see, when we are talking about China being an enemy, I think what we need to understand, or perhaps we understand, but we do not always implement that in terms of policy, is that the fundamental problem is in the nature of the beast. And when I'm talking about the nature of the beast, I'm consciously using these words, because when you look at China, it's a beast which kind of, which does not give a single inch of space to anyone. And instead what it does is that it salami slices our space. And that is what is going on over there along our LAC. But in spite of that, there is some talk about, China needs to realize the potential of this partnership, forgetting the fact that China knows very well what potential or no potential, whether this particular relationship has. But in spite of that, China is not going to do anything. China will do exactly what it suits its own interest and nothing more than that. So when we are talking about, you see, as a layperson, I'm going to call myself a layperson. I'm a journalist, just a journalist after all. I do not understand why we are still part of institutions, I mean, platforms like, say, for example, Shanghai Corporation Organization or the BRICS. BRICS, by the way, it has outlived its utility. It's of no use anymore. And we give the excuse of saying we are part of SCO, and both these bodies are totally China-led. I mean, we say that SCO is, we are there because that way we can interact with the Central Asian republics. The BRICS kind of keeps us on the same platform with Brazil, South Africa, Russia, and all that. But what we tend to forget is that, is, you see, it is easier and better to have strong bilateral relationships with these countries than be part of bodies that are led by China. So what am I leading at? I am talking about basically, we cannot be part, I mean, okay, we know all about multilateralism. There's a lot of talk about multilateralism, but the problem starts when, you know, multilateralism starts looking like fence sitting. And that is, I think there's a fundamental problem with India's China policy. We tend to fence it quite a lot. I think I am saying Galwaan is an important watershed mark because that has reduced to an extent, but we still have a long way to go, because when we are talking about, we have to choose a side, and China is, we cannot certainly be on China's side. Okay, now, then here obviously the question comes in terms of, I would say, when you're in broader geopolitical context, what do you do with a malign power like China, malign and malevolent power like China? We know how China is, and the kind of aggressive power that China is, imperialistic, aggressive power. So obviously, in terms of geopolitical context, we have to think in terms of the Quad. Now, when we are talking about the Quad, the problem is that, you see, is it possible to have some kind of a fruitful relation? I mean, I would say even a Quad, when it comes to the fact that, you know, countries like Australia, Japan, and even US, and all of us, can you possibly build up Quad as a possible security alliance? Because that will have to be the ultimate goal. Because when you are talking about containing China, the ultimate goal is about, it has to be a security alliance. But can you have a security alliance by divorcing it from economic relationship? I mean, we are constantly told that, you know, it is possible, but is it really possible? When we are looking at RCEP, for that matter, say, for example, from which India came out, and rightly so. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to Australia, Japan, all of them are very, very part of the, I mean, very closely aligned in terms of business with China. So until and unless Quad or whatever grouping that is planning to take on China has a solid economic dimension to it, it is going to be very, very difficult to counter China. And when we are talking about economic dimension, I think what we need to understand is that ultimately it is about decoupling. It's about decoupling from China. It is about supply chain resilience, which some work has started in the Quad when it comes to Japan, Australia, and India. But I think we need to really develop that. And it is in this context, it is no decoupling from China economically is going to be very difficult. We know what the West is facing. We are also going to face the same thing, but it is possible. It is not that it's not possible. And I think India can do it in terms of, because the movement that is happening out of China in terms of industry and manufacturing, a lot of it, India has the capacity, because India is a large country, it has the capacity to absorb a lot of that. So, but we need to get our act together. I don't think we are yet there, but we can be there. And in the meanwhile, let's have no illusions about China. You cannot have peace with China. China, again, I'm going to say it's our enemy. If it was not our enemy, but the problem is this, we sometimes live under certain ideas. I mean, I still don't understand why we had to give up our advantageous position we had along the line of in Galwaan. The buffer zone, why we created, why we gave up the heights. And what is happening right now in Galwaan, China is building up its military a lot of work is going on over there. Now, China is kind of, I mean, the situation is such, what is the guarantee that this whole thing will not break into a kinetic conflict? 1 year after Galwaan, I think, have we still not learned our lesson? Why do we believe that we can actually talk to them and make them pull back? Is that going to happen? I have got my grave doubts about that. Frankly, I mean, what I'm going to say in the end is that we need to again recognize the nature of the beast. It's a nasty, immoral, I mean, the worst kind of thing that could have happened to the world. So let us recognize the nature of the beast. Let us recognize for what it is and work accordingly. Don't trust China. Don't trust a single word that China says. Thank you. Thank you. Now, if the next speaker can please, can we have Dr. Kanwal Sibal to talk about, now let us start the actual session.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and there's such a galaxy of speakers, especially on the military side, who can say a lot about what is happening 1 year after Galwaan. But Joyita, your very passionate intervention has prompted me to make some comments on it before I go on to other things, because while I can fully appreciate why you are taking this position in view of China's constant, how should I say, needling us, aggression against us, and various things. I think, but for the record, some things need to be clarified. So, if you don't mind, I may not agree with some of the things you said, or put them in a different perspective. I agree that what happened in Galwaan, and of course the standoff in Ladakh, is a watershed moment, no doubt about it. And it has changed the way in which we are now looking at China, because the earlier policy of, as you rightly said, managing differences has not worked. And that policy sort of was born in 1988 with Rajiv Gandhi's trip to China, and then developed further, where we felt that we can keep discussing the border issue, but find ways to normalize our relations as much as possible in other areas, especially the economic areas. Now that policy has received a body blow. There is no question now going back to the same way of looking at China. And External Affairs Minister, and I'm quite happy that he's been saying this repeatedly, not once, twice, but virtually in all his interventions. He makes the point that it cannot be business as usual unless there is tranquility on the border. So we now have very clearly message to China that unless their behavior on the border changes, the rest of the relationship will suffer. And this is beginning to happen, as you rightly said. We have taken decisions on WhatsApp, even on investment by China, and the latest step of not allowing China to participate in 5G trials. I think we should look at what's happened on the border with China. Also, a little bit in the context of China's rising assertiveness and aggressiveness. They have been assertive and aggressive with us in any case over the years. And we've had these incidents like Depsang and Chumar and whatever else before this bigger thing in Ladakh. So it's not as if this is something entirely new. But what is new is that China has become very aggressive in various geographies, whether it's the South China Sea or the East China Sea, the Senkaku affairs on Taiwan, and the manner in which they are now challenging the United States and the diplomatic defiance. So you've seen in Alaska how they talk down to the United States, and the wolf warrior diplomacy, which other countries have experienced, whether it's Sweden or France or Germany or Czech Republic. So we should also look at what's happened in in Ladakh in that broader context of change in China's way of dealing with the rest of the world and asserting what it sees are its sovereign interests. I also agree that we've been very reticent on raising the Tibet issue. We've never questioned China's, or we never walked away even by implication from our earlier position of recognizing Tibet as part of China, whereas they contest our sovereignty over Ladakh, and lately even more so. I have in the past been suggesting a few things that we could do with regard to Tibet, but we've not wanted to take the plunge because I think the policymakers know that for China it's an extremely sensitive subject, and it can raise other issues in the relationship which we may not be able to successfully manage. I don't think we need to comment on what's happening in Hong Kong. The British are most affected, the West is affected, let them deal with it. I think if we have to raise any issue, it has got to be Tibet and not Hong Kong. With regard to SCO, BRICS and our participation, first of all, yes, China's weight in these organizations has increased a great deal. But to say that these are China-led may not be entirely true, because Russia is a very powerful factor in this, because most of the Central Asian states were erstwhile part of the Soviet Union, and Russia has a great hold over these states even now, though on the economic side, naturally China is dominant. BRICS was certainly a Russian initiative. It happened at the time when I was ambassador to Russia. Now, if we were to walk away from these organizations, we would have complications with our relations with Russia. And why would we want that? There is no harm if we are present in these platforms. In fact, the Chinese would be a little frustrated that India's presence in these organizations will not allow China to manipulate these organizations the way they would want. And this also gives us a platform to continue interaction with Russia and keep an eye on what is happening in these organizations and in that part of the world. Now, insofar as countering China is concerned, I think while we can be very frustrated with Chinese policies, but how do you really, in a sense, isolate a country which is the second largest economy in the world, the largest exporter in the world, which now has a presence in all parts of the globe. Incidentally, the EU's biggest partner today is China, and no longer the United States. This is the degree to which China has spread its coils economically all around the globe. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, they have actually drawn into the Chinese orbit so many countries, including including Italy and some countries in Eastern Europe. And in our neighborhood, we have Nepal and Sri Lanka and others, and we see what's happening on the ground. So what is necessary is selective countering in the most sensitive areas. And that, I think, is feasible. And the West is on that road, and we are also joining with them in this, which is why in the Quad Summit, it was agreed to set up a group for advanced critical technologies, which would be 5G, later 6G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and what have you. And decoupling is not possible with an economy which has such a large role to play. In fact, in the latest statement by the EU during the G7, they have actually openly said that they need to have a relationship with China for economic recovery. And that is very important to them. So there can be an effectively selective decoupling in the critical areas that I mentioned, and also prevent Chinese investment in critical technologies, investment in the West, where they can get access to critical technologies. Also, if you look at the United States, they still are the biggest economic partner of China. The EU has signed a comprehensive investment agreement with China. Japan is the second largest economic partner of China. Australia, China is the biggest partner of Australia. Vietnam, which has serious territorial issues with China, has a very flourishing economic ties with China. So have countries of ASEAN, including Indonesia. Even recently, when the Chinese foreign minister met 4 foreign ministers, 3 of them were from the EU, Poland, Hungary, and Ireland, and the 4th was Serbia. I was a bit surprised that Ireland had joined them. Poland and Hungary, I can understand. Now, coming back to the subject that we are discussing 1 year after Galwaan, it's quite clear that we are now in a situation of stalemate. On February 10, there was a written agreement to disengage on all friction points, but this is not happening. We've had 11 rounds of Corps Commander talks, and I believe at the last round, no joint statement could be issued. So it's quite clear that having agreed to disengage in the Pang-Song-So region and the Kalas Range region, where we had taken up some advantageous heights, and China was willing, therefore, to make some compromise. In the rest of the friction points, they don't seem to be able to want that. And this is part of, I think, their longer-term strategy of imposing high costs on India, both military and economic. So what has really happened is that, unlike in the past, where in fact there were military presence on both sides, the militarization of the border is now much deeper. And I think the consensus view is that China is now very clear in wanting to keep India in check and keep the pot boiling. There is also a view that they may not cross red lines, because that could result in a kinetic conflict, which they may not want, and there are downsides to that for China. But if they keep us under pressure, their larger purpose of destabilizing if not destabilizing, slowing down our rise, and preventing us from playing our regional role more effectively, or for that matter, international role more effectively, would be served. The US has been supportive, as you know, on Galwaan, and in their many statements they have cited Chinese aggression in Ladakh, and during the standoff, we did receive help in some critical areas for them. Now we have to watch how far the US-China confrontation will go under President Biden. Earlier, there was some concern that Biden, as Democrats are, may look for some kind of a compromise and understanding. But that now does not seem quite to be the case, because more and more the United States under Biden is becoming confrontational in tone, which therefore means that on our side, we have to take now some very important decisions with regard to the deepening of Quad and the whole Indo-Pacific concept. If you again look at Jaishankar's statements, it's quite clear that now we are sending signals that we are ready to deepen our participation in Quad. In fact, he went on to say in one of his recent talks that that bilateral relationships in this area are not sufficient. Therefore, we have to go beyond the bilateral relations and look at a plurilateral relationship. In other words, it was justifying the creation of a Quad in this new perspective. In other words, we are now becoming much more committed to this. Finally, a few words from what I read in a recent article, which was quite interesting in terms of the military dispositions that China has taken in Tibet, which could be quite worrying in terms of China's future intentions, because they seem to have deployed terrain-specific kinetic systems for mountain warfare, whether these are tanks or armored personnel carriers or towed artillery guns and truck howitzers and multiple rocket launchers and surface-to-air missiles. They have placed the latest fighter aircraft and as well as helicopters to counter our air force. They have earlier on, it was believed that their airfields did not have shelters for their fighter aircraft. And now they're saying that they have built underground shelters. They have built heliports opposite India's advanced landing grounds. The Chinese drones are operating freely. They have built 118,000 kilometers of roads in Tibet, and also parallel to Arunachal Pradesh. More significantly, they are changing the demographic profile of Tibet close to our borders, where they have created villages along the across the LOC, populated by Hans. The psychological warfare goes on. The relationship with Pakistan needs to be watched. The Chinese Defense Minister was in Pakistan recently. The Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission was there too. And some of the panels have been discussing the prospects of a two-front war and the likelihood of that. So, in other words, our relationship with China has got seriously destabilized. It will take time for us to draw the right lesson, not draw the right lessons, we have drawn the right lesson, but take action on the lessons that we have drawn on this, because our trade with China is still very large. Our dependence on them for critical inputs still is large, and therefore we can't decouple from China in a hurry. So there it is. 1 year after Galwaan, the outlook for our relations with China is bleak. We are confronted with a very serious challenge. There are no easy answers. The COVID epidemic has hit us very badly, not China so much apparently, hit us very badly. We have to focus on economic recovery. We have to build our defense capabilities. There will be a huge pressure on our fiscal system. So if there is a third wave, God forbid, there will be another body blow to our economy. So the outlook is not that optimistic, but we have shown a lot of grit, and I must compliment, and I end with that, I must compliment the armed forces for their superb organization skills and the determination to put 50,000 soldiers in the conflict areas through the winter. It is remarkable. But the pity is that the nation doesn't realize it. There are elements in the country who are soft on China, who apologize for China, including people who have held high positions in the foreign policy and security area in our country, and I had an occasion to comment on this. Very unfortunate. But there it is. There it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I now invite Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain to give his presentation, please? Is he there?
Thank you very much, Joyita. Thank you so much, Aditya, for inviting me for this great panel today on a very, very appropriate day. And I dare say I'm in company, great company of people who are all writing and speaking and shaping policy for the country. Just heard Dr. Kawal Sibbal. Always such a pleasure hearing you, sir. Nothing that one can disagree with what you have said. But let me take it from a different perspective. I will give it more from a military point of view. Let me start by expressing deep regrets, which is what you always do in the military. Deep regrets for the loss of our 20 brave hearts, very, very brave men of our army. It was a tremendous display of leadership, a spirit of corps, coming together of different regiments, arms and services, and everyone trying to deliver there. And I think this is one of the rare challenging situations that we have ever faced like that. Can it happen again? Can this happen? Can Galwaan happen? I'm not talking about Ladakh overall. Can Galwaan happen again? That's the question which comes in every other day to us, and particularly today, a lot of people who are asking this. And my ready answer to that is, when you convert the LAC to the LOC, it can always happen anywhere on the LOC. So just cast your minds to Kashmir and see the LOC situation there, where there are situations such as bat actions and ambushes and things like that, raids across each other's lines of communication across the LOC as such. In that kind of an environment, these things can always happen. You are patrolling and you come into a clash, although admittedly in Ladakh the separation of troops is much, much larger. But having said that, the rules of engagement have now been clarified far more, and I'm sure a very deep orientation is taking place for all troops who are getting deployed there, all officers and troops who are getting deployed there. But despite that, the trust deficit is so high that this kind of a situation can very well happen again. Of course, anyone can question my perception about this. The other question which is coming on this day today is, why did the Chinaman change tack from a perfectly fine, flowing economic, political relationship with Mr. Modi, having taken it by the neck completely, and both the leaders having come together and looked forward to far more positive times? Why did all this suddenly change? Of course, there are all kinds of reasons which have been put out. The advancement of the timelines of the development of Chinese superpowerdom, which Xi Jinping has got, the ambitions that he has got of 2035, 14 years from now, when he will be, well, 82 years old, approximately the age which Mao Zedong was in his time. Also, there is a lot being spoken about the biological warfare angle today of the pandemic, and in combination with the pandemic, some kind of a military coercion. Of course, we can't take this theory further, this hypothesis much further, because there is no confirmation yet of what really happened on the pandemic front. I suppose this year and further, we will get to know much more. But that is something at the back of the mind. Obviously, what I have always been writing about after analyzing has been that something seemed to have unnerved China. And the only thing which I could put my fingers to was the fact that in the last 5-6 years, perhaps a series of events have happened which have somehow messaged the world differently and messaged China differently. China seems to have read this situation from an angle of rapidly changing, rapidly marching Indian strategic confidence. With this government, with Mr. Modi's leadership, a lot of people don't like me writing all this. There are a lot of people who say that I've got a political angle to it, and I have to laugh at that many times and say, just examine the realities of the ground. People were worried, your adversary is worried that you have undertaken certain decisive actions to improve your overall external security environment. And this has got him worried. He wanted to coerce you. He wanted to message you. He probably drew out a political strategic aim that he wanted, exactly what Joyita was saying in the beginning. You know, do you down, make you look down, make the world look at you as a second best power. All those various angles of showing you that you are just not up to it. That was perhaps one of the intents. So, wood warrior diplomacy, not really employed against you, but wood warrior diplomacy employed against many other nations, Southeast Asia, other countries. Here against you, a military coercion with a clear understanding that India is going to be alone. There is no one going to come to India's aid in doing things here. Was he willing to take it further to a full, all-drawn-out war? That is a moot point for us to look at. So it's very easy to draw up a political strategic aim here. Very, very easy to do that. You know, things like extracting, sending out a message, doing you down, or carrying out a certain amount of attrition on you, or whatever. I mean, it's not very difficult drawing out a political strategic aim. The issue is, how do you translate this aim into a military aim? And that is where the challenge comes. Because right there up in the high Himalayas, you can keep pestering us, you can keep doing all kinds of things. But to have a clear-cut military aim as to that military aim achieving the political strategic aim, that becomes the major challenge. And to my mind, there were various options he had as far as drawing up his military aim was concerned to achieve his political strategic aims, starting off from a full-blown war with territory as an intent, capturing territory. In the beginning, even I was assessing, is China looking for territory? Is he looking for the entire Shyok Valley? Is he looking for an alternative routing for the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the BRI as such? All these kind of things were coming to the mind even at that time. So territory is one of the aspects of intent. Would it be a full-blown war with destruction as the aim? Destroy the Indian forces which come into battle there, to then send home a clear message that you are just not up to it militarily. Was that the aim? Or was it the aim, a short, sharp engagement with focus on technological supremacy, establishing technological supremacy? Was that the aim? Or was it just border coercion and a standoff? Or lastly, was it a dual front war? Bring in a dual front threats onto Ladakh to demonstrate as to what can happen in the future. So there were many, many options that China had. And what exactly did he choose? We really don't, we have to look for a compromise formula between all of them, because Galwaan seemed to have upset a lot of things. What you have to really give Galwaan here is that it upset a lot of things which China may have been planning at that particular stage. Perhaps China was equally surprised on the Indian response, not only to what was happening in Galwaan and places like that, but also very much to the actions at the Kailash heights. And you can see the levels of frustration which went up very high, the kind of manner in which troops drew up in front of those 7 heights, those defenses on the 7 heights, etc., ready to almost do battle at that particular time, threatening our troops, etc. That was the kind of anguish that had been created. But we must remember that this quid pro quo, which we did, and a very well thought out quid pro quo, which was done, it had the capability perhaps to be a QPQ for the entire front, but essentially it narrowed down only to the Pangong Tso. I look for General Sharma to comment on this statement of mine particularly, because I strongly felt at the end of the day, this QPQ actually dwindled down to only a QPQ as far as the Pangong Tso was concerned. We were looking at a withdrawal of the North Pangong Tso, and there was a withdrawal we would take place on the South Pangong Tso. A lot of people are questioning us today that why didn't we stay on to try and achieve much more in terms of the withdrawal from Depsang, etc. I don't think the switch for the withdrawal from Depsang existed at the Kailash heights. That is my contention, which I believe in at the moment. So can there be war in the future? At the moment, we know what the situation is. We know what the situation is. There's a standoff still taking place. A partial withdrawal is taking place. The 11 rounds have also taken place. The Chinese have suddenly downgraded. They want the 12th round to probably come up with major general level talks. Why is this particularly so? Are they not serious? Do they feel that decisions are not required at this stage? So therefore, leave it to just keeping the situation under control, some kind of a stabilization there, and keep messaging that yes, we are involved in engaging with each other at the moment, but no serious decisions are going to be taken. That could be possible. One of the reasons why it's being reduced to Major General talks. The other thing is the international, something very well explained by Kamal Sibal Saab. The international environment is such, there's a reset taking place. And the pandemic has created problems with international economics, and problems in international geostrategics and geopolitics, which the Chinese would want to wait out and see. They would like to see what is the outcome of the G7, for example. What is the kind of, are the Europeans and the Americans all coming back? Are they coming back seriously? And that seriousness, are they going to be looking at China and the containment of China? How serious is the Quad? We are making a lot of noise about the Quad, which is very good. We need to be there in the Quad, and we need to be very active members of the Quad. How far is the Quad going? How far will it go? The Chinese are just going to keep reading this kind of a situation. And while this is happening, an odd action, an odd pinprick, not alone in Ladakh, it can happen anywhere on the northern borders, will probably take place. A little testing of the waters through an odd cyber action on an important establishment of India will probably take place. What is very interesting to observe at the moment is Xi Jinping's recent statements, particularly one on looking at wolf warrior diplomacy as something very negative for the image of China. And the second thing is why China is not getting a better soft power kind of a reception internationally. Why is China being looked upon so negatively? Now, for a nation which has been following war under informationized conditions from 1993, and which was the first country to actually adopt from 1990 Gulf War I, the whole doctrine of informationized operations, it's surprising that a country like China is speaking about this. And if you see this morning's cartoons, the manner in which they've depicted India at the G7 conference, in virtual presence of ours, showing India in very poor light. You know, showing India with a drip hanging on top, an elephant with on a drip and things like that, just goes to show that the Chinese information warfare apparatus just doesn't seem to know how to play information warfare internationally. I think we've given them too much. We tend to give them too much to say the Global Times and this and that. They're really professional in this whole game of IW. I think they're absolutely non-professional. They have no idea how to play this game at all. And we should take advantage of that. We are far better at it. We are more stable. We know how to play this game, but we need to be a little more proactive on this entire business. So I think we are looking at times in which the standoff will continue, at least definitely into the next year. We are in the middle of the campaigning season for 2021. I do not anticipate any deterioration in situation, etc. But what I do foresee is that we need to be very proactive and continuing our efforts in Ladakh. You just heard a complimentary word from Kamal Sibal Saab saying that the Indian Armed Forces have played up so well. 50,000 troops have been placed on ground there and kept through the winter. It's been a difficult challenge. We all know that, but we have to take it beyond. Our state of defenses is not what it should be. We need far better equipment, far better infrastructure, far greater training even to that extent, to continue being very professional that we already are. So this is something that we cannot wish away under any circumstances. I would only, at the end of my intervention, I would only agree with Kamal Sibal Saab particularly, and not disagree with what Joyita Basu said, but I do believe that closing your options by withdrawing from the SCO and the BRICS and things like that, where for the SCO we have worked for a period of time. And it's not necessary that you declare your enemy at the drop of a hat. Have you seen what Mr. Modi has done for the last 1.5 years? A lot of people are questioning him. He has never mentioned China. He has never mentioned China. I wrote a whole article on this justifying this aspect. You don't have to, from the day you fire one bullet, you don't have to start calling everyone your enemy. There are ways of working into it. That is what international politics, that's what diplomacy is all about. Who better can tell us than Kawal Sibal sir? So I think we should be there. SCO is a great place to be, to keep your tentacles out. In all this, your tentacles must be in every sphere. Military, diplomatic, economic, everywhere you should be there. India should be there, seen to be there. And we will arrive. We will arrive slowly. We will not arrive the Chinese way, you know, bashing our way through. We are a more stable, more staid country. We will arrive in our own time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Joyita.
Thank you, Lieutenant Hassan. That was a very, I mean, all the points were, of course, very interesting. And particularly when you talked about China is unnerved by India's strategic confidence. So, and I also, I mean, okay, I agree. Although I talked about why China is a foe, that yes, there are, I mean, subtler ways of declaring China a foe than going around hammering about it. And if I can just make a quick point about what you talked about China's information warfare. I mean, it is basically, I think it's very North Korea style. I think it's a, I mean, fundamental problem is, you see, it's very Soviet Union, North Korea style. I think this is a fundamental problem, which are non-democracies, which are authoritarian powers. They just don't have the understanding of how people, you have to influence people. So they are either buying or they are hammering it. I mean, I think that is one of the reasons why they are so, I mean, Soviet era, very old style. Now, if I can now please invite Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, please.
Thank you, Joyita. And I also pay my condolences to those brave warriors of ours who lost their lives last year, 20 brave warriors. Now, I will take about 5 to 7 minutes and place some points before you. First is that last year was a clarifying moment for us. We got great clarity after 30 years. 30 years had lulled at least the people on the borders into some kind of complacency because of the joint working groups, because of these 5 agreements carried out, the protocols, the CBMs, the SR talks and the political talks being carried out. That China was never spoken of in those terms. And people on the borders were also equally cautious. Last year clarified many things to us and absolutely clarified that there cannot be a thought process of taking China lightly, which was being done in some manner in times previously. So that it's a strategic moment for us and we must plan for it. While the China planned for it, we were not prepared to come this way. Now, what happened last year also clarified many issues that what China carried out was in multiple forms. But first time he brought out troops, 2 divisions from 30 barracks. 30 barracks is a training area near Shaidullah. He moved the 30 barracks troops and brought them down opposite Saichin before he actually came and did the transgression. This was a well-planned move. It was premeditated. It was pre-thought. And he carried out, that is first. Secondly, he did multiple incursions. Multiple incursions had never been carried out before that. We had 3 instances of long-term standoffs in 2013, 2014, and 2017 in Doklam, but there were no multiple areas. This was first time it happened in multiple areas. First time again when the troops did not withdraw back, when the banner drills were carried out as per protocols. So he decided before he came in that the protocols and the CBMs will be dead after he does the incursion this time. And first time he carried out, also there was a casualties in the very form. We had lost 20 martyrs and Chinese lost as many as Chinese will not tell us. So the fact of the matter is that there were many firsts in last year. That also is part of the clarifying moment for Indian Armed Forces and we ought to be prepared for it. Now, what are the positives that we take from here? Having seen what Chinese did, we learned their tactics a very big way on the borders. We learned actually how he brings his troops forward, how he withdraws them. A lot of people have now studied as to how his troops withdrew from Kailash range, the speed and the alacrity shown for withdrawal backs. You know, large amount of learning process has taken place in that 1 year. Politically, we learned that that status quo is not the answer. We have to be prepared for China as an adversary. We also managed to brought the summit of the Quad in a fast time frame. It couldn't have happened in any other form. However, I will also state this here, that Quad, all the other three nations have great relationship with China in economic front, and to say that they will cease to have relationship, $550 billion trade which United States has with China can never go away, or to $350 billion trade which Japan has is not going to go away, or the $150 billion with Australia has gone and not going away. So Quad is there, but we have to fight our own battles. Economically, it has been spoken by Ambassador Sibbal. Now, I will divide economic relationship India and China in the course of last 1 year into two parts. One is trade and second is investment. While we have been able to curb Chinese investment to a great extent, especially in the form of Huawei and their banks which were working at, for example, in Chennai or in Bangalore, where there were projects being taken, that investment has been stopped. But the trade is not gone. Now China has become our largest trading partner, even after 2020, larger than United States. We have $77 billion trade with China, while the United States, we have a trade with only 75. So there is a change which has happened in the course of last year. China has become a largest. So trade will not change. Investment might be hurt. Last, the issue I wish to raise about militarily. Now, why did Chinese do that? There is large amount of writings and large amount of information. And did China achieve its end state that it wanted to achieve? I am not fond of the ideas of the DSDBO road or the Article 370. All those are red herrings, and I think don't that matter. I think it was a plain and simple intimidation and coercion being carried out against Oxygen, period. Only against Oxygen. It wasn't done in Tumor, same sector. It wasn't done in Demchok or Fukche or any one of the other areas. It's only Oxygen and the areas that Oxygen that Chinese came across and carried out. Why they wanted to come to 59 line? Then why didn't he reach 59 line? He did not reach 59 line. He could do, Chinese attempted to do what they attempted to do only by surreptitious manner. They were not willing to fight a war. So without fighting it, they came to this area. What did they want to achieve here? Did he achieve it? Did Chinese achieve it? I'll put my head in the noose and say that I think Chinese achieved in a great measure what Chinese wanted to achieve. Why do I say so? In 1960, the Chou Enlai wanted 20 kilometers of buffer zone between India and China. After the war, it was stated formally. Before the war, he stated this in the 1960 April letter, also the 1959 letter, 20 kilometers. He didn't achieve it. But what happened in the last 1 year? We have achieved a buffer in the entire Oxygen area, which without actually getting onto it. In the Galwaan, it happened first time. After 15th of June, we established a buffer zone of 4 to 5 kilometers in Galwaan across PP14. And both the troops are not patrolling this area of that buffer zone. It happened similarly in Gogra. I will not explain Gogra because of confidentiality issues. It happened in Raki Nala. In the same Raki Nala at the area of Bottleneck, we denied Chinese their patrolling across to Burtse, which is their 1959 line. He denied us patrolling across to Depsang Plateau. So a buffer came up in the area of Raki Nala, the 4 to 5 kilometers. And finally, a buffer has come up in the area of Finger 4 and Finger 8, which is about 8 kilometers. And a buffer has come up also in the area of Moldo and the own side of Trishul Heights. So in Oxygen per se, he has been able to construct a buffer right from Karakoram Pass is not an issue in contention at all. But south of Karakoram Pass, right up to Kailash Range, a buffer of various dimensions has been created in this course. So Chinese have made sure that despite the whatever CBMs we had, there will be no fighting between us. Now, of course, there is lack of trust, and the Chinese may violate it, or we may violate it, with the Chinese have been saying. But the fact of the matter is that the buffer having been created, they have protected their troops from coming under direct fire from us. And, you know, since we have changed rules of engagement, they have managed to do so this one. So whether they achieved it, no, he did not achieve the 59 line. But yes, he made sure that his troops are not in direct firing in any one of these areas, because the Oxygen turns off from Zangla and goes further inwards. So the Aksai-Chin actually finishes close to the area of Kailash range. So, you know, from Karakoram Pass down to south, he's been able to do so. So that's a very significant change that has been carried out in the course of 1 year. Now, what next? What next is the issue here? When the Chinese wanted war, no, Chinese certainly didn't want war. I agree with what General Hassan has said. If he wanted war, he wanted to mean business. He would have brought armor a brigade in Demchok area, which is plains along the Indus Valley, and he would have placed the tanks there and threatened us in that area along the Demchok Valley, 75-kilometer long valley, 5 kilometers wide. He would have brought something there. He would have brought tanks to Chepji and Chumar area. He didn't do all this. He just narrowly focused himself to the area of Rudok, Moldo, the area of Depsang Plateau, and that's all where the armor brought. There was no armor seen anywhere else. He did not want a war. Clearly did not want a war. He clearly didn't want to fight to get the areas that he got. He got it all surreptitiously. You know, if he had got involved in Chumar, there would have been a fight. If he had got involved in Demchok, there would have been a fight. So actually, intelligently, he occupied only those areas that matter to him to deny us and make a firm line. What happens next? Excellent question. I think Chinese don't want anything more than what they have got, and what they have got, they are happy about it, and they have protected Depsang. He has also protected the now mining which is being carried out into Aksai-Chin, where copper and zinc has been taken out in huge quantity. A township will be built into Aksai-Chin near the Linsang Plains, the Salt Lake areas, so that he'll take the zinc out and take the copper out. The largest mine that he has in China has come out in that area, in the hill there. So he will protect himself into those areas, and he'll be able to take it out. So the fact is that I think he has reached where he wanted to reach. Now, I finish here by saying one thing, that there is obviously what Ambassador Sibbal said, that there is intense movement being carried out into Tibet. There are 5 railway lines being built, total 5 railway lines. There are 5 highways being built. There are multiple state highways, you know, like G219. There are a large number of roads which starts with S. So the S3021. There are a large number of S roads being built, which are coming very close to Nepal border, to Bhutan border, to Arunachal Pradesh border. And then there is a large amount of rehabilitation of people being carried out closer to borders. 264 villages are being built along the LSE. Now, I'm not very sure whether I know legally the 2005 treaty, which talks about inhabited areas, that there will be no discussion on inhabited area where people are staying, whether that is a bone of contention by putting nomads and putting hands and bringing them so close to the line of actual control and establishing villages like one we saw in Longju. There are 2.5 lakh people being rehabilitated along the line of actual control. Does he want to go back to 2005 saying that hereafter the LSE get firmed in and blocked forever? That I think the legal beavers or the diplomats will have to study what is the relationship to 2005 treaty on people living on closer to borders. So the thing is, in my personal view, border is as much as sealed and gone and frozen. But the warfare of types of electromagnetic spectrum, of space, of cyber, like what he claims to have done in Mumbai, or what he says he downed a drone in Doklam, or says he downed a Sukhoi in Tezpur 2 years ago, whether he can do all that and what can he do on electronic fronts, I think we need to wake up. If I take what the CDS said in the Raisina dialogue, he clearly mentioned that we have great weaknesses on cyber and technological fronts that we need to pull up our socks. I end here and we can discuss it subsequently. Thank you, Joyita.
Thank you, President Sharma. And as you said, status quo is not the answer. If something Galwaan has taught us, and that status quo is definitely not the answer. But whether we can underestimate the Chinese intentions, or whether we can actually say that, they do not want war, we will know. I'm certain others also will have a view on that. Now, can we have Professor Swaran Singh to make his presentation? Is he there right now? Can you please join us, sir?
Yes, Joyita, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can. I can. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I was mute for a long time, so I forgot that I was mute. Thank you, Joyita, for inviting me, and thank you for Global Counterterrorism Council team, especially Aditya, for inviting me to be part of this very eminent luminaries panel. And I usually love to listen to them instead of speaking along with them. So it's an opportunity for me to maybe say a few things as to how I look at 1 year after Galwaan, especially after so many eminent people have spoken. We couldn't have had more senior person than Ambassador Kanwal Sehgal. We have had generals who have almost measured every foot of the territory we are discussing. And I particularly noticed that General Syed Atta Hussain mentioned how Chinese would not like to go for a direct confrontation. Nevertheless, it's going to be, and it has been, a difficult challenge. And of course, clearly underlined how Chinese have perhaps have they really achieved what they wanted, and there will be some possibility of peace as far as Chinese vision of is concerned. It may not be acceptable to us. Let me also begin by first saluting, I think, the brave soldiers of India. If anything, the Galwaan also reminds us, with all the pain that we have had during this day last year, that India stood up very clearly. I think entire periphery has noticed that India stood up to the Chinese challenge. And that has inspired, we can notice a little bit of change even in ASEAN's stance on the South China Sea disputes and others, including Japan, Vietnam, and others. So I think it was noticed in the periphery that India is one country that can stand up to China and has continued to stand up to China with all the questions that we could keep raising about in terms of cost and benefit analysis. How much has India gained compared to how much it has cost India? But there is no question that India's standing up was noticed in the periphery and maybe even beyond the periphery. But I also understand, as was said before, that we have successfully maintained about 50 to 60,000 troops in advanced deployments around the line of actual control, and Chinese have done something likewise along with their so-called exercises and training that they have also kind of done for sports posturing. Something that we hear in media very often is that other than the difficult terrain and the season and the freezing winter, it literally costs India 100 crore rupees every day of what we have deployed on the border. During the tension last year, there was emergency procurement of ammunition and equipment, which we successfully managed. So there's a successful part, but it cost $2 billion. And it has also made India to think of sort of focus on military modernization. And we know the recent document talks about 130 billion US dollars, not Indian rupees, US dollars to be allocated for between 5 to 7 years of military modernization, which is, of course, much deserved. And Indian budget, of course, is reaching around $50 billion per annum. Now, irrespective of this kind of commitment that nation has shown in standing up to China, in modernizing Navy, armed forces, Army, Air Force, etc., what is interesting is that our strategies and our mechanisms, our way of dealing with China remains still fairly confusing. For example, enormous rhetoric last time of decoupling that Joyita also brought about. And General Sharma just mentioned how China actually has continued to be the largest trading partner. And if you look at in terms of India's imports, then the next country we import from will be 1/5 of the size compared to what we import from China. The interesting debate going on recently in media is that Chinese believe that for the first 5 months of this year compared to last year, the bilateral trade has risen by 70%, whereas Indian calculations talk about 50% increase. So that is where the contention is, whether trade has kind of risen by 50% or 70%. So our intertwining of bilateral economic engagement, despite all the symbolic banning of about 100 plus online applications of Chinese, etc., has continued over a period of time. And that is the reality on the ground as we see. So we are continuing to have militarization of line of actual control. We have had about a dozen plus meetings, right from defense ministers, foreign ministers level to corps commanders on the ground. And we have known that some of these meetings went up to 10 to 11 hours. We have been just talking about 1 hour plus, and we know how tiring it can get. And imagine these corps commanders have been talking about 10 to 11 hours on the border to find out what solutions can be delivered. Only solution that we have delivered so far is the Pangong Tso Lake area, is where disengagement has been agreed. And my personal opinion, and I think several other people have already said that, is that is where in south of Pangong Tso, India had gained certain critical advantage. And that is where Chinese have agreed to sort of achieve the disengagement, and they have no great incentives after that possibly to look at other areas of tension to achieve similar disengagement. And disengagement would then lead to demobilization, and I'm not sure when we are talking of demarcation, etc., which is almost looking like a pipe dream at this stage. So fundamentally, despite all the commitment, all the allocations, all the strength and commitment that forces have shown on the ground, leadership, political leadership is showing in terms of modernization, trade has continued to thrive. Why it is that there is a dead end almost in terms of resolving the border tension? Let me say that maybe as an academic, I would look for lessons in history. And history tells us that we have had similar tensions before. For example, one could talk about 1959 to 62 could be one period. 1986 to 88 could be another period. 2013 to till almost now could be another period. How did we resolve situations at that time? And in fact, many people now believe that the bonhomie or camaraderie that Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai euphoria had given us in 1950s proved that we perhaps overlooked what was happening on the ground and we got into trouble. And is there a possibility of drawing a comparison between the camaraderie between 2018 to 2019, 2016, 17 onwards, particularly two informal summits showcasing enormous bonhomie between the two leaders, not just building it, but actually showcasing that to the world. At that time, simultaneously from 2013, and all people from the armed forces are much better aware how both the intensity and frequency of border face-offs was increasing simultaneously at that time. And I heard someone say that the change last year was that simultaneously at 4 places there were face-offs. And one could look at it in terms of simple soldiers' psychology of getting fatigued and irritated, and therefore losing, sort of that restraint that both sides were showing. Or one could explain it in terms of increasing infrastructure. Again, General Sharma just mentioned how rapidly Chinese are building infrastructure on their side, so they can easily mobilize a larger size and more rapidly the forces to the forward areas. To some extent, India does also have similar capabilities. So that was seen as why these frequency and intensity was increasing. Was there a malicious design behind it? That I think was something which was not really explored or even debated in public. So is there a possibility of comparing of the 50s bonhomie versus the 15 to 20 bonhomie that sort of led us into such a situation? How did we tackle it? How did we solve it? I would say to some extent, larger structural changes at regional and global level facilitated major initiatives on the ground at the political level. For example, what created tensions in 1950s can also be explained in terms of Sino-Soviet split. And by 1959, India opening close relationship with the Soviet Union. So there was a structural change here. And in that sense, that led to a certain amount of tensions being built up. And then we had a small war in 1962. How did we come back to the negotiating table? One could talk again in terms of structural changes or historical events. Historical events like death of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, death of Chao En-lai, death of Mao, death of Marshal Tito, which is where the first meeting of Indira Gandhi happened with the Chinese leader. So one could look at those historical events and how leaders clenched those opportunities to open doors and begin to talk again. Again, in 1986 to 88, young Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, who wanted to run politics by looking at his everyday diary, saying at 11 p.m. on Thursday morning or Friday evening, he is going to achieve this result and achieve next result. He was someone who believed in technology. He also understood the beginning of the collapse of Soviet Union. And you would remember the famous Delhi Declaration of Gorbachev and Rajiv Gandhi. So understanding of structural changes were also again building the tension on Satarongchu area. Tension was building up. And how the young Prime Minister decided to clinch, just like in Mizoram, he decided to clinch a deal in India. He decided to visit Beijing and have a long shake hand with Deng Xiaoping, which opened another chapter, which is a chapter which is continuing till date, which is called Chapter of Peace and Tranquility on the Border. Let us focus on agreeables rather than stay stuck on disagreeables was how the focus was. Trade emerged as a strong pillar of rapprochement since then. Despite all the irritations, trade, as we are saying, even in 2020, continued to rise. So what can be now that can help us in that sense of finding either any structural changes taking place or any bold initiatives being possible? Incidentally, we understand that both China and India have very, very strong, ambitious, popular, decisive leaders. So there is a potential of some bold decisions taking place. But will that happen or not is a separate question. We also notice that increasingly the pandemic has made a certain hit on China's political goodwill around the world. And we are seeing how G7 countries are now talking in terms of democratic 11 nations. They want to launch something called Build Back Better World, which is B3W, to sort of counter with the Belt and Road Initiative. So there's a certain resilience. Decoupling, as Joyita was mentioning, is being debated. So are we seeing a situation of China being treated as another pole? Joe Biden, of course, remains very, very shy of calling either Russia or China as enemies. And he still likes to use words like challenge and competitor. But there is a certain dichotomy which is becoming increasingly visible. And some people now emphasize the need to create that space of Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, where you have this cushion of engaging countries like China and Russia in another platform to keep gauging how they are considering their own strategies in that sense. So India is right now balancing, attending both these kinds of meetings, increasingly, of course, getting pulled into Quad because of tensions with China. But are these situations which are going to allow enough space of maneuvering for Indian Prime Minister, for example, to find an opportunity to sort of clinch some kind of understanding with the Chinese leader? Or is it that the constituencies will keep him shy of, gradually keep drifting towards the United States and join that kind of league and not have that maneuvering space to still find an opportunity or space to clinch a deal with the Xi Jinping? Is it possible that Xi Jinping would be visiting India in September? BRICS Summit is coming. India is hosting BRICS Summit this year. And you remember 2017 BRICS Summit in Xiamen? That is the time when we were stuck in Doklam for 73 days. And that created a situation where Indian Prime Ministers going or not going created a situation to find a breakthrough in Doklam. And visit to Xiamen led to next April first informal summit in Wuhan. So would that kind of opportunity create a space where two leaders could clinch and do something? Because what I'm underlining, and I'm not the only one underlining this, most people, including our serving current foreign minister in his India way and several other speeches, keep saying that we need to start a new chapter of building a new equilibria between our relationship, because that old chapter that was built in 1970, in 1990s, of about a dozen agreements, templates and working mechanisms and mechanisms and border meetings, perhaps they have outlived their life. That is why a dozen plus meetings have not delivered anything on the ground. So we need to look at new set of CBMs, new set of building mutual equations, because China and India are no longer same. Our interactions and stakes when we meet in regional and global forums are much serious today than simply bilateral historical issues. Much more challenges emerge because of our interface at regional and global level. And therefore, I think that creates a very new template as to how these two countries see what are the challenges. And I would not be, sort of not saying it very openly. I think most people say that clearly, that China is really trying to send a signal to India that India's drifting very gradually and rather rapidly lately towards Quad and United States is something that upsets Beijing. And that is a signaling which is happening. So it's not bilateral issue on the border. It's an issue where India is engaging some multilateral organization of some certain countries, which is pushing Chinese to up the ante on the border. So it's regional and global equations of China and India which are disrupting our bilateral line of actual control interactions on the ground. So therefore, perhaps an entirely new template has to be built. And I'm sure Secretary Sibal would have some understanding of what kind of next template is a possibility between two countries, because in diplomacy, it is the Ministry of External Affairs which would possibly lead a group of other ministries and other stakeholders into dealing with these issues. What kind of new equilibrium can be built? Because despite all our anger, anxieties, trade continues to grow. I think we will also see investments beginning to grow. India is already beginning to be lenient in certain sectors to allow Chinese investments into India. And there is a reality here of enormous economic engagement with China, but increasing security and defense cooperation with the United States and its friends and allies. How to balance that relationship? What is happening to India's relationship with Russia in the meanwhile, because of our drift towards the United States? What is happening to Russia-China relationship meanwhile, China's relationship with Pakistan, for example? So what I'm underlining here is that it's not a relationship limited to our bilateral historical irritants on the ground. It's a more complex relationship now in 21st century, where both India and China are seeing that each of them get impacted by the other, much more with what they are doing at local, regional, international level, rather than what they're doing on the ground. Because on the ground, it seems that for all these years, line of actual control has only seen pushing, shoving, and stone pelting. These are extremely potent and very, very robust forces. One has to understand how much effort it would take to maintain that restraint of pushing and shoving. And that is an enormous achievement in that sense. So on the ground, I don't see both nations see that the equations are out of control or derailing, which they cannot control. But therefore, then it looks like what happened in Galwaan last year was part of signaling and was not something that was loss of control on the ground. It was part of signaling with each other. And that is where, if you look at it in terms of signaling of anger, angst, anxiety, in that sense, then we have to address very different issues rather than very often what we discuss issues on managing the line of actual control, because managing line of actual control, I don't think has been an enormous worry for either India or China. They both managed these very, very capable, very, very successfully. I have often seen and said that their face-offs on the border were nothing more than signaling each other. And in that sense, to some extent, they also had a positive spin that it is good to signal each other than lose control. So I would see Galwaan as well as nothing more than signaling. It was not loss of control on either side. It was signaling. But now if we go into nitty-gritty of who did what, when, where, I don't think that's an issue which we should be even trying. We should try to address in public domain, because both will become extremely defensive and that will make it non-starter. let that be to the closed door meetings of journals as to who did what, when, where, and for academics to see 30 years later. At this stage, I think we have to understand that equation in China and India is increasingly becoming global equation and regional equation, and that is where it has to be managed. And that would require a very different template of confidence building than what we have at this stage. So my vote will go to saying that we need to really start a new chapter, because chapter of peace and tranquility of 1990s is now outdated and exhausted and fatigued. And to start would require again a long shake like the one we had in December of 1988. Whether that will be possible, when that will be possible, we don't know. But that is what will be required to start a new chapter, is what I believe. Thank you so much, and I'll be open to any comments and questions in case any of them wishes to ask me anything. Thank you, and back to Joyita.
Thank you, Professor Swan Singh. You made some very interesting points, including that India standing up has been noticed, and India has gained a lot of respect because of that, and it has also resulted in India gaining goodwill. And what we have witnessed in the last 1 year is China's loss of goodwill. As for China signaling of India, we can always, once we open up for the questions, we will talk about that. For the time being, if I can invite Lieutenant General KJ Singh to speak. Is he there, Aditya?
Yeah, Jyotia, can you hear me, please?
Yes, please start.
Good evening, everybody. Firstly, it's a very difficult challenge to come as a tail ender after such profound people have spoken. But only saving grace is that it started with Ambassador Sibbal. There was General Hasnan and Rakesh Sharma. And then, luckily for me, there has been an academician. So now I can try and change the flavor back to military. And let me start by flagging what, as a military professional, I find after 1 year after Galwaan. Firstly, I find there is inadequate acceptance of the fact that we were caught with our pants down. We were surprised, and we have to accept it, and we have to investigate it. It can't be that we just keep talking about peripheral issues and not address the fact that we were indeed surprised. And one of the things which surprised us was that we were very proactive in trying to translate the agreement of Mamallapuram of strategic guidance to our subordinate commanders. Chinese didn't do it. They, on the other hand, prepared. And that is what led to use of barbaric weapons at Galwaan. Clubs and nail-studded weapons and knuckle dusters, all that came into use. So my belief is that there is inadequate amount of analysis or monitoring which puts us into this situation. Please let us not gloss over such a thing, because if we have to learn any lessons, it should be that we should not allow Galwaan to happen again. As I look as a military professional, I look at 3 or 4 major landmarks. Firstly, tactically, Galwaan was a moment that we will have to feel very proud about. I myself feel very good because Santosh Babu had worked under me, and I had told him that, Santosh, you are going to make an excellent commanding officer. I must confess, he has proved me wrong. He has made himself into an exceptional commanding officer. He did very well in those challenging circumstances and sent a very correct signal to Chinese that you can't kinetically push Indians out. The second thing that I find is an operational issue, that the fact that we could orchestrate occupation, preemptive occupation of Kailash Heights, and without Chinese knowing it, despite their famous technological asymmetry. If their surveillance and all this was active and still we managed to survive surprise them, then one question mark definitely arises. Is that famous technological asymmetry operationally deployable? Has it got deployed operationally? That is another issue that comes out in my understanding. The third issue is that it is a discovery moment for India. A large amount of Indian public has been fed into this thing, Parvat se Ucha, Himalaya and all that. But the fact of the matter is, after Tibet went to the China's way, the buffer evaporated. And because of Chinese excellence in making their infrastructure, Chinese have come right on our borders, and Himalaya is no longer a barrier of that kind which is written in poetry and our literature. So strategically, we have to thank Chinese that despite George Fernandez and others saying so many decades back that China is our enemy number one, we have now realized it. And we have done the strategic shift. We have reorbited our formations. We are taking care of that thing, and there is going to be no escape from it. Let me tell you this is my feeling. And I also compliment our formations which could come up there, sustain themselves, our logisticians, and subtle messaging of using SFF. I hope we use more of it. We build on SFF and we use indigenous, because one belief that I have is some of these problems arise because the formations and units keep moving. Not the formations, but units. Suppose there is a unit of Kumaon and it is replaced by Gadwalis, and they want to prove a point that I can do this patrolling better. Sometimes this leads to local situations. So can it be that we use more of SFF and ITBP who are mandated to do this? We have to somehow, if not today, at least in next 5-10 years, make ITBP capable. Because if you'll have those border guarding static forces, then they will give you a kind of stability on LAC, which would be required. And regular troops could supplement them, could be used as QRTs, QATs, as QPK, and those kind of options could come up. Because ITBP is mandated for this. And what was ITBP doing at this time? Please pardon me. Only thing we read in newspaper is they were making a COVID hospital in Delhi, Sardar Patel Hospital. Is it even correct messaging? So we should put these forces under unified command of Armed Forces, Army, and then get them to work in their designated areas. I tend to believe that there was a stalemate, and stalemate is not a victory for China, who started it. China has not fully achieved what it set out to do. It has partially achieved. Buffer is not a bad concept. After all, Chinese are far more ahead of us. They have a huge big asymmetry. So if the concept of buffer has to get built in, I think we should re-educate our public, and we should not be going on this thing that we will have status quo ante, no loss of territory, not even an inch. I think we have to get into some amount of pragmatism and get people to accept that there will have to be certain amount of acceptance of, because Chinese are not going to go back. They'll try different maneuvers. They have brought the talks down to Major General, then they'll take it up again to Lieutenant General. This Chinese tactics of dang, ding, da, tha, whatever they do, talk, have a tussle, fight, talk, it'll carry on exactly like after Samdrong-Chu. So if we are hoping for status quo ante, it is unlikely. They are not going to do that. I will once again flag the issue that while Chinese have technological asymmetry, but let us not get totally overawed by it. The question marks must remain. See, we were told that microwave ovens have come. The drones will come and give them noodles and all that, swarms will come. They will also deliver munitions on us. Nothing of that was seen. If they lost Kailash without using that kind of capability, then definitely that kind of capability is still not operationally deployable in those areas. It might be because of high altitude and other limitations, but Chinese are working in that direction, and we have to be careful. We have to work on it. And I do concede the point that they may have used cyber capability against our power infrastructure. Once our power grid was out, they may have even used it against an aircraft of ours. So we have to work in this discipline. There is no doubt about it. CDS has already said that. I also tend to believe that MEA should get more enmeshed in our field formations. There is no harm in some MEA that should be in Eastern Command and in Northern Command and work with those formations. And there is certain amount of learning, meshing in forward reporting, which should come into it. Finally, what I take out of it, that there is asymmetry. China is far ahead of us, but we have to, in the interim period, continue to work. We have to build our infrastructure. We have to focus on capability building. The unfortunate part is we, in last 5-6 years, have not invested in our defense budget. So suddenly we are caught up with a situation where we cannot really, unless we raise our budgetary allocations, it will be difficult to build those capabilities. But I hope in the next budget we cater for it. And also there is a challenge that we have to build our maritime capabilities. Navy has already gone the route of committed liabilities, but that may not be enough. Even Air Force may need more budgeting. In the interim period, we have to work on our alliances. But we cannot totally bank on alliances. Nobody is going to do the dirty job for us. In Quad countries, we are the only one with borders with China. And we will have to suffer the consequences. So there is not even for us to become extra gung-ho. In seminars, you may talk about it as options, but there is no need to go to the town and keep announcing that China is our main enemy, we are going to sort out the China, we will reclaim Aksai Chin. Nothing of that is likely to happen. And we should be pragmatic, in my perception. We should engage with China, but we should not concede. We should have our red lines clearly defined, and we should build on QPK, not only in Kailash, but there are enough in Chumbi Valley and other places. We should work on those, and China is quite an intelligent country. They have their antennas deployed. They will certainly pick up that messaging, and they will realize what India is doing. I would also like to say that there should be no slowing down in the rebalancing and reorbiting which is taking place. It is time that theater commands come up, and especially against China, so that we can, China will pick up that messaging, and our regional command should also be empowered, because China has this habit of working through regional commands. We should also empower our regional commands with clear-cut red lines and options given to them. Finally, I want to say that Chinese challenge is going to remain, and we have to work in long term, but we have the resilience. On ground, our troops are capable, and locally, technically and even operationally, we are not likely to get unbalanced. We have that kind of capability, and it's a long haul. We'll have to work on it, and there is no shortcut. And in the end, we must consider re-educating our public and not build up expectations like we'll throw out Chinese and we will reclaim Aksai Chin. Pragmatism should be the order of the day. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General KJ Singh. That was a good reality check, and especially when you said that, we were surprised. There is no glossing over the fact that we were surprised, and no amount of analysis is going to take away from that fact. And the other point is that, China is not going back. This is something we have to accept, and we have to prepare accordingly. But at the same time, we need not lose heart. And I particularly liked your point about where you were talking about, in spite of technological asymmetry, that operational capability which China has on the ground or not, there are questions about it. After this, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. After you, we have Lieutenant General Arun Sahni, if he is there. If he can please start speaking. Lieutenant General Arun Sahni, is he there?
Yeah, good evening, Joyita. How are you?
Thank you.
Firstly, as I said, being the last batsman in, it looks rather difficult to talk, but I'm told there are one or two more speakers after me. It's been a long haul for everyone who's listening in, and including those who have participated as speakers. Firstly, my thanks to Aditya and GCTC. Thank you for being the moderator. And before I start, I would also like to doff my hat to all the martyrs who fought bravely and made us all proud, all men in uniform feel proud, the nation proud of their capabilities and the sense of self-sacrifice when it comes for national interest. Where do I start? I think that it's a lot has been covered. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me, Jyota?
Yes, we can hear you, but
yeah,
I think some other voice was interfering somewhere.
Okay, sorry.
You need to mute SR Roy.
Yeah, everyone, please, everyone else, please mute your microphone. Okay.
I'll quickly just flag a few issues just to share my own perceptions on some of the aspects that have already been spoken on. Why did Galwaan happen? I think 2017 was a turning point for different reasons. The BRI talk, the Doklam itself. I think political resoluteness, which was evident since then, was a contributing factor. Development of infrastructure and preparedness was a factor. And I think more importantly, something which Mr. Swaran Singh said, I think signaling and messaging to India was very much part of the whole ball game. How it needed to unfold, what was his end lines or bottom lines that he wanted to achieve. But I think signaling and messaging was a critical issue. One, to India, the other to our immediate and extended neighborhood, that India is not as big and as resolute and strong and capable to look after the rest of the people. Fortunately for us, the reaction of the armed forces at least laid that to rest. And I think we gained well in the manner that we did perform. I think more importantly, 1 year down the line as a subject is, what is the status today? I did hear it in one or two talks. I've been hearing this on it being debated in media, in the print, as well as in the in various talk shows that are happening. I think somewhere down the line, when I look at it today, 1 year down the line, the seriousness of India to look at getting back to the status quo seems to have got diluted. And it's not only our side, it seems to be more the impact of China, the way we've been hearing about downgrading the people with whom they want to discuss in the military to military level. The WMCC's last meeting was in September 2020. And I think somewhere down the line, this our own engagement and the capacity to raise this issue at all levels seems to have gone down. So I think somehow, as it is coming out, this stalemate may be a success for us, and achievement may be an advantage for us. But I think somewhere down the line, we seem to have lost the plot of wanting serious pullback from him. And I think that is an area where we stand today. We are seeing the LAC evolving to the LOC, which has, as has already been highlighted, a lot of collateral problems that come in from maintenance, expenditure, economy, and other kind of issues that would come out into the plane. I think the other issue that I would like to just comment on is mixed signaling by India. I think what we speak and what we do, though I fully defer to the wisdom of the senior diplomats who are there, but I feel your presence in certain forums where you really, what kind of gains are you getting? Just talk about the trilateral between India, China, and Russia. I think India-Russia has a great relationship. So what is the use of being in that trilateral? What does the Shanghai Cooperation give you if you've got relationships with CAR which are directly on the track? I think if you've got direct signals, if we don't have, maybe then I've not understood it right. But I think where you've got direct engagements, where you're gaining nothing by being on these different forums does give a mixed signal as far as I see it. And what do I see? Why the seriousness should be there to try and disengage? Because I think one of the forums I did hear General Huda talk about it, and I think it was very right. The inherent risk in having so many people face to face can result in a confrontation that will happen. Even General Ata Asnan mentioned about that. So I think that needs to be looked at, and there needs to be a greater deliberation on how do we see the end state. Do we go back? We keep saying status quo to April 2020, but I'm sorry, are we doing enough to make sure that happens? Irrespective of the fact what China is trying to downplay the whole issue. because it seems to have gained what it wanted to gain in the first stage of this engagement. Now, what do I look at the issue as far as surprise is concerned? I think this word of surprise has been spoken time and again. We have to remember that post-Kargil, India created a corps there, a 14 corps which was created in Ladakh. So the question of saying that we did not have troops there and did not have the capacity to meet the engagement that was there, that was not really the issue as far as the military was concerned. Where we got surprised was in reading the signaling and the messaging of troops there, the intentions of those troops to come and manifest. And why that has happened, this is the complacency, and this is where I feel the strategic community at large needs to be a little more conscious. We tend to play the narrative time in and time again in such a manner that you lull ourselves into this state of complacency. Yo, the Chinese came, they'll go back again. They came in, there was an intrusion, and they'll go back again. Whereas I think the other elements of national instruments of national power need to be able to read when the intentions are trying to go wrong. And I think that is where is a strong lesson for us to see that we should be able to read signals, whether it's China, Pakistan, or of any other sorry, can you hear me? I switched off for a minute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yes, we can. We can, please.
Yeah. So I said what I felt was that there is a new narrative that is playing out. India will never have a kinetic engagement with Pakistan or with China. So I think we need to only develop the asymmetrical and disruptive technology space, which is correct. But please look at the hybrid aspect. Please look at the fact that the kinetic capability for a country like India, which has live borders with two inimical neighbors, is always going to remain. So please do not lull ourselves in the strategic community by saying again and again that, listen, there is not going to be any war. It's only going to be in cyber, other dimensions of warfare, the non-contact, the what they're talking gray zone operations. I'm sorry. There is a requirement for us to be conscious and be very careful in the strategic community, the narrative that you and I talk and try and espouse in international fora that seems to get played back and is sort of held against you itself as a tool. What do I speak about? The asymmetry, I will not talk. I totally agree with what General KJ talked about. I think the qualitative and the quantitative capability of China needs to be reassessed very, very pragmatically. Yes, in the disruptive spaces and in the new horizons of cyberspace, and today when we are looking at in global commons, there is undoubtedly a need for us to address those issues. Are we doing enough? I think I've seen a lot happening under the emergency powers to meet and mitigate the immediate shortcomings. But are we on the whole hog of being Atmanirbhar? I'm sorry, I think you need to take the private industry totally along with you if you want to promote and make sure India becomes self-sufficient in the niche technologies. If TCS and Wipro and the, I would say, Infosys can provide the world the backbone of functioning, can be the emerging technology masters, why aren't we being able to utilize their services for ourselves and ensure that the basic high value inputs are available to us in a real time frame? I think that's an area we will have to look at. I would also like to just leave two more issues that I would like to flag. I would say, have we really reevaluated our vulnerabilities right across the spectrum? We've concentrated on Ladakh. We've looked at Aksai Chin. Some years back when we had the Sumdrong Chu and those areas, we looked at the Northeast and the Eastern profile. Have we looked at Central India very wholesomely? That's the central sector. We have great gaps there. We have great problems. We are talking about what we saw, what happened with Nepal. We saw what happened now with those new villages being done. I think we have somehow forgotten that this demographic shift along the borders is a normal ploy that has been happening for the last 40, 50 years by China all along the border in the Northeast. All villages that used to exist, because as I said, I would like to also correct, I commanded 3 corps. So I looked after the Chinese border in the Arunachal Pradesh. So a large amount of villages that are there have local populations which have been bought from the hinterland, and these local border villages have been reshifted. What has that done to us? We have lost out our capability of human intelligence. And I think that is what it's being downplayed. He's trying to establish camps and habitation and then say, as this habitation existed here, I'm sorry, this land belongs to me. So I think we should be very careful. That has been flagged beautifully, I think, by Mr. Swaran Singh, as well as by, I think, one of the earlier speakers on that issue. And in the end, I would just like to say, what have we learned? I think two things that I feel we have learned and which we haven't still, I hope we have imbibed it right. One is the importance of leverages. The Kailash range showed us that a leverage on ground gave you undivided dividends or unexpected dividends when it came to resolving and getting an action done. Have we created these leverages in the immediate neighborhood? Have we created leverages with China, which we can try and play up? Yes, we have a leverage of the Dalai Lama in Tibet. How much we want to play it, I'd leave it to the people today in power. I'm sure they're more, they are playing the nuances right on Tibet. But I'm saying, do we have leverages? If not, let's please develop leverages within our immediate neighborhood where there are economic linkages, economic dependencies, so that it will ensure that at the end of the day, we would be able to try and negotiate from a position of equal strength, if not a greater strength. The second issue which has come out and which is very, very predominant and spoken about is that collaborative security is the answer. Our old understanding of strategic autonomy does not get diluted if you have collaborative security mechanisms at a bilateral, trilateral, or a multilateral level. And I think the Quad is a great example of that. And I would say this maturing of thought should not become a political issue that India is selling out to the others. But I think if we have to meet the challenge in the Indo-Pacific, I'm sorry, we can never have a Navy that can tackle and take the task on in itself. So our growth in the maritime domain has to be in sync with what kind of collaborative security structures we've been able to put up in the Indian Ocean with nations who are like-minded, democracies that are like-minded, and I would say people where there is a congruence of interest between the two people. And I think last bit that I would like to say is, it is very important for all of us outside when we speak in any forum to not create an emotional hype on issues. This emotional hype created in our nation tends to force the political leadership, because the way we have our political structures, to take decisions which may not be pragmatic and with long-term intent. So I would just say that there has to be a certain amount of maturity in the way we deal with issues. And last, I would only like to say, if China is there to stay, we do not have to match him penny to penny, rupee to rupee to be able to gain in strength. But we have to understand our critical strengths that we have, leverages that we have, create leverages and empower ourselves with the right instruments, whether it's in the disruptive domain to carry out kinetic warfare, or it is in the economic sphere, or it is in the diplomatic space, or in the political dialogues that come in and emanate hereafter. With that, I will hand you over, because I think a lot has been said, but thank you very much to GCTC for having invited me. Delighted to be with this great panel. And Joyita, Jai Hind, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chalsani. It's a very important point that you made. You know, I mean, I've been thinking about it, that we should not lull ourselves into believing that the China, it cannot descend into a kinetic conflict. This can always happen. Okay, now next speaker we have is Professor Ritusha Tiwari. If you can please join us, ma'am. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Am I audible?
Thank you so much. Yes, you are. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyita. Thank you for inviting me over. Thank you, Aditya, for inviting me to this this very important and pertinent panel discussion. As others have said before me, I don't know what all is there left for me to say after a bevy of arguments that have been presented in the most formidable manner by previous speakers. But I'll try my 2 bits, and I'll try to keep my bit shorter in terms of leaving some scope for question and answer session. as we've seen with the coronavirus pandemic and its health and economic consequences, the boundary crisis has affected Indian perception of the border issue with China. And as the previous speakers also highlighted, that India's trust in China has depleted to the lowest possible, perhaps in the last so many decades of our engagement with China. And moreover, the recent developments have also kind of reinforced and even accelerated the existing Indian concerns about China, that some of which have been actually there since mid to late 50s. There are widespread calls for the policymakers to reassess India-China policy in the foreign and security policy establishment. And the boundary crisis, as it were, has been particularly, has resulted in a kind of remarkable convergence amongst the Indian government's, former China specialists in terms of defining this particular new normal between India and China as irreversible kind of position with a significant damage to India-China ties in future. And as we look forward to a very adversarial relationship in future, and we are kind of staring at it, the need for India to build and rebuild, reassess its partnership further to tackle China has been stressed out as already by so many speakers. What I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes is to maybe objectively assess the India-China relations in terms of the kind of fact and prognosis balance that we have. The first one being that there has been an expansive territorial claim by China, and that remains a fact. There is no two kind of opinion about that. The second objective assessment leads us to believe that there is an increasing divergence about each other's role and strategic positioning vis-a-vis each other for India and China, both in the region and also outside of the region. The third objective assessment of the fact that needs a kind of attention is that the grounds for negotiation have become very frosty. It's not easy. It's not, and the next, of course, the next fact is that there is heightened complexity of crisis management, owing to factors like miscommunication, missed deadline, strategic collision between China, Pakistan, so on and so forth. So all of these facts put together have kind of led.
Ma'am, you're on mute. Kindly unmute your mic, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, now.
Just
last 10 seconds. Last 10 seconds.
Okay, all right. So all of these objective assessments of India-China relations have kind of propelled my few thoughts, which I would like to sort of share with all of you and maybe look forward to a kind of response to these. I have 6 set of recommendations which can be further nuanced, which can be further elaborated. The first one is that we need to improve India's ability to anticipate and
Kindly unmute your mic, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so to improve India's ability to anticipate and handle Chinese military moves without necessarily encouraging significant new Indian investment in. The first recommendation that I was talking about was to basically improve India's ability to anticipate and counter Chinese military moves without necessarily augmenting or adding on to new Indian investments in offensive capabilities at this time, because we are also dealing with effective management of the pandemic. Now, India would benefit from a greater capacity to gather and assess intelligence on Chinese forces along a very extremely and often very treacherous border that we share with them. And though some steps have been taken in this direction, including the acquisition of 2 MQ-9B drones in the winter of 2020, more needs to be done. And either a new or modified AI surveillance and sensor technologies should be invested in, which are more cost-effective means to provide the Indian forces with early warning of Chinese territorial encroachment. For instance, if we look at Indian Army engineers, that core can be strengthened much, and they should be brought on board to consult, on the potential for co-developing new ground sensors, which can be explicitly focused for the use of such a rugged terrain that we share with China. And this can be done in collaboration with international partners, and we can identify international partners for these co-developing technologies. The second recommendation would be to improve intelligence sharing and expand Indian deployment of secure communication terminals. And this would improve the timely provision of classified and sensitive information which may be collected from partner platforms, partner countries. Indian establishment may fast track and facilitate the expansion of such partnerships with collaborative, while identifying collaborative actors in the region. The third recommendation would be to identify opportunities to help India improve its resilience capacity in terms of Chinese cyber attack. And we have the example of China's October 2020 attack on Mumbai electrical grid. That should serve as a warning shot, suggesting that Chinese hackers have already kind of compromised the networks of critical Indian infrastructure. And such recurrences in future do indicate likelihood of rising difficulties, and it's not impossible that India's vulnerability in this sector would be heightened. Improving India's resilience to these kind of disruptions is possible, and I think we should forge partnerships and forge technical alliances in terms of technical expertise with partner countries, potential allies. And I'm again and again very consciously using the term partner countries and potential allies, and I'll try to sort of summarize that when I'm done with all the recommendations. We could be identifying our critical units such as National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, and may have sister institutions across, on the board from across our partner institutions and partner countries. Fourth recommendation would be to enhance India's ability to deter and withstand possible Chinese economic, coercion, and we need to diversify the import basket, thereby reducing dependence on China. And I think India can increase its resilience in this regard by identifying short-term arrangements for alternative sourcing of critical industrial outputs and inputs. India can work with other like-minded states in South Asian, Southeast Asian, and extra-regional, actors, including the Quad partners, Japan, Australia, US, leverage extra-regional multilateral forums to identify and develop a coordinated multi-party response strategy. Many states have also kind of been experiencing the imbalance in trade with China, and the Chinese policies have been accused of targeting specific industries in those states. So if you look at the example of Japan, for instance, Japan's access to rare earth supplies, or wine tariffs on Australian exports, all of these are very familiar and sensitive topics for these states, and these increase the possibility of partnership with India in terms of the kind of common risks that these countries face vis-a-vis Beijing. Together, these countries can identify specific gaps in Chinese capabilities in terms of technologies, trade, access to market, and and the impact of limited sanctions in these areas. India could plan to act in concert to reinforce the cost to China of its economic coercion against itself and also against other states, but its action can be in terms of phased manner, in terms of a delayed manner, in a way of giving Beijing enough warning to avoid any kind of unintentional escalation of dispute from our side. The fifth recommendation would be that India could seize basically stress upon all kind of diplomatic opportunities to promote restraint and remove obstacles to any possible peaceful resolution of disputes between China and India. As I said earlier, the frosty relations with neighbors mean that once plausible kind of diplomatic initiatives could escalate to now the kind of dispute that stares us in the face, and the dangers associated with crisis escalation are very much on the table for all of us to sort of look at and be privy to. Now, for instance, there is an increasing stress on the web of potential escalation paths that could link China-India border conflict to, India-Pakistan tension, or escalate into maritime dispute, or into economic diplomatic reprisal, and even cyber wars. So all of these are added disadvantages associated with any kind of escalation. Through official diplomacy and track to conversations between South Asian partners, Quad partners, and experts on South Asia, India may create and amplify its articulation of specific Chinese aims and insecurities in South Asia to better anticipate any likely Chinese response to Indian policies and development. The sixth and final recommendation is to sort of assess Chinese strategic goals in the South Asian region and recalibrate the response from Indian side. The undemarcated status of the boundary dividing India and China is at one level at the root of the current crisis between the two countries. However, we look at Chinese motivations ranging from domestic insecurities on the Chinese side, the strategic ambitions and the misjudgments about the intentions of their neighbors within the Chinese domestic policy are to blame. And Beijing has been also, it has also escalated its territorial claims over Eastern Bhutan, opening up so many fronts, as it were, in terms of territorial disagreements with all its neighbors. And these kind of justify the fact assessment that there is an expansive, territorial claim that we are looking at in terms of the Chinese intentions so far as its territoriality is concerned. And Beijing has also been, to offset this kind of growing anti-China sentiment, which has been resulting from this, very evident expansive policy. Beijing has pursued very intensive outreach programs with its neighbors to neutralize and maybe to curb the growing unease with China by assisting all of these neighbors like Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, or Vietnam in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. China is making some kind of technological intrusion into all of these countries and is heavily subsidizing 5G telecommunication network developed by Huawei to secure information and pursue maybe intelligence gathering in these countries. So the way there has been an exponential increase in the last decade in terms of a very intensive information sharing, and there has been a proliferation of cooperative engagements across regions. More and more, the governments have been looking to deepen their multilateral and regional engagements, and they just do not sort of bank upon the bilateral, as it were. So this is in response to that entire question whether we seek to gain anything when we are a part of an ongoing multilateral process or a forum, be it the SCO or the BRICS or Quad for that matter. Bilateral relations and bilateral treaties do typically have a possibility of the involved states swapping some kind of concessions to each other, but they also address a very limited, they address a very limited concern, and concerns like biosecurity or intellectual property or investment at a regional level may not be simply within the purview of the bilateral treatment. So it's more prudent to sort of look at multilateral engagements and regional engagements in a more sort of, with an open mind, as it were. And the appeal of bilateral, the appeal of strengthening the bilateral cannot simply replace the importance that multilateral forums have. So I very consciously use the term partnerships and potential allies so far as making these 5-6 recommendations materialize is concerned. And it's important because it's in a very connected and a very globalized world where a disease is also being shared by all of us. So it's not possible to sort of formulate a policy in isolation without any kind of partnerships in mind, without any kind of, without increasing the, ramifications for cooperation rather than, increasing ramifications for a very isolated conflict. I'll rest my case here, and I do look forward to comments upon this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ritu Tiwari. I found, in fact, I had a related question because we have been talking about, this decoupling. My question was about, is decoupling off the table considering our dependence on China, not just our, I think it's like the whole world's. I mean, the kind of dependence we have on China, but at the same time, as Professor Tiwari said, we should be diversifying our import basket. And why not just import? We have to think in terms of, supply chain resilience. We have to think in terms of our as India as a manufacturing base. But is decoupling off the table? If who wants to? Professor Singh, do you want to answer that?
Let me try, Joyita. I wouldn't say decoupling is off the table. That will be expecting too much, that we completely resign to our fate of being dependent on China. That's never going to happen. The national pride will keep us engaged with this decoupling debate. And pandemic has given it a certain boost. But how far that decoupling is going to be successful is where I think interesting debate can take place. World is realizing that the enormous China centricity of production and supply chain has created certain leverages which China is using to the discomfiture of other nations today. So that consensus, I think, is important for India to engage with, and then see opportunities where we could, along with several other nations who are very uncomfortable with this enormous dependence on China, are trying to find other alternatives. So, particularly post-pandemic, I assume as the demand and supply is going to get boost again, all of us are going to go back to theaters and eateries and other places and tourism because of being suffocated over time. So demand is going to rise and so will the production. What direction to give that? That is where I think there is an opportunity. And if India can sort of blend very well with the consensus which is emerging, I think there is possibility of this long-held desire being implemented to a certain extent. But whether China will cease to be an interesting player, I don't see that happening. And China will continue to be a very, very powerful economic partner for most nations in the coming times. Pandemic has seen its economy still building bigger. And therefore, I see no escape from the fact that China would be writ large in global production and supply chains. Yes, the consciousness would mean that there is certain collective effort being thought of, just as the B3W we just mentioned earlier at the G7 meeting. Those intentions are perhaps beginning to take certain momentum, and India could align with those intentions. And I think therefore it is particularly important for us because we are the neighbor and we have enormous tension. Countries like Argentina may not have that trouble of continuing with those kind of China dependence, but we have that often being used or misused in terms of our bilateral irritations that continue to occur, and therefore all the more important for India to use that opportunity to align with that building of consensus to see how far we can do this decoupling. But decoupling wouldn't mean end of relationship with China is my take on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone have any question before I ask the next question? Is there any question anywhere? Just a second. In call messages.
Well, we have a question on how critical for India to strengthen strategic alliance with Nepal to counter Chinese transgressions. Would it help India to be lesser emotional in relations with Nepal, which results in the counter some reactions and our more understanding on the India's security concerns?
Who wants to take that question?
And one more question for General Sharma, if he is there. Do you see sufficient investment in India in intelligence mindset, trained observers at state and non-state actors level? Seen Chinese observers consistent on international and national policy, whereas in Indian presence sporadic, we lack focus on the institutional memory. Your views, please. And for General Sahni, we have, how do you suggest we judge India's relations with Dalai Lama in hindsight? Do we leverage as expected, or is the engagement out of balance than being mutually beneficial? That's it.
I'll take on the question, Aditya, the one which was addressed to me immediately, and then if you want, I'll try and attempt the others. But I think why I said how should the Tibet card be really played by India? One fact that remains, which is irrefutable, that with the presence of the Dalai Lama here, and him being the temporal head for the large population that still exists on Tibet and the diaspora across the world, including in India, we do have, in China's viewpoint, will always retain a leverage which can become troublesome. How do we play it? Do we openly talk about it? How do we nuance this input? I think that I would leave it to the current set of hierarchy who are getting a better picture across the spectrum, whether you want to raise it. But the fact remains that Tibet, with the presence of the Dalai Lama and with the large diaspora, gives us a leverage which exists, which I think, as far as China is concerned, will always be of concern. So I think we can look at that in that manner. And how to play it, when to play it, should it be openly touted in public forum? I think I'll leave it. There are pros and cons, and I'm sure the people in power today are well versed in when to use that particular card. So that answers. There was one more question which was there. Is Rakesh here? Then I can leave it to Rakesh. Which was the other question? Aditya, is there anything else? I missed out on the initial bit.
Thank you, General Sani.
Welcome.
We have another question which was asked by the same person in the first, is that how critical for India is to strengthen a strategic alliance with Nepal to counter Chinese transgressions? Would it help India to be lesser emotional in relations with Nepal, which results in some relations and more understanding on India's security concerns?
No, I saw General Basnet here himself, I think, but may I just put it in two manners? Undoubtedly, India's relationship with its immediate neighborhood has to be solid. If we retain expand upon the relationships that exist because of civilizational, religious, cultural, other linkages, and economic linkages, I think it's critical for us. I spoke about leverages. Your leverages happen when you have with your friends not only a great synergy of thought and cultural linkages, the soft power linkages, it also needs to have certain amount of hard facts on ground. And I think there is no doubt we have a very strong relationship on the military domain. And I think one of the maturing of the events of post-Galwaan is that there is a realization that there is a role in collaboration with the external intelligence to utilize external engagement by the Foreign Office, also a military diplomatic role that exists. And we have such a great relationship both in Nepal, we have that with Bhutan, we have that has been developed to an extent with Myanmar Army over a period of time, but which of course presently must be in a state of limbo. We do and are continuing to develop a great relationship with Bangladesh. So I think the role of military diplomacy in this region to be a pillar for greater fundamental linkages between the two nations will always be critical. And I think he's absolutely right. That is essential for India and should be one of the key areas for us as we go ahead.
If I can come in for 1 minute on this, the worrying indication is all around India. Chinese weapons have proliferated. Chinese are in Myanmar, Chinese are in Bangladesh, Chinese are in Pakistan, JF-17 being made, given to Nigeria, Chinese are into Nepal, Chinese are into Sri Lanka. Unless we translate our defense diplomacy and cooperation into co-production, into joint development, this is just a talk we are indulging in. We are not able to deliver on this front. We have to ramp up this capability seriously and seriously. I must put it across because see what happens. If Chinese are providing these weapons, it also gives them the capability to keep the technicians, maintenance people. Permanent intelligence setup is coming up in these countries. And Pakistan also draws benefit from it because China and Pakistan are jointly producing these weapons. So Pakistanis also masquerade there as technicians. So you are talking of one string of pearls, but there is a huge big string of armament pearls which is getting created around India. And unless we wake up, see, Galwaan has given us a lot of wake up calls. Let this also be a wake up call. We must do hand holding of these nations and indulge in joint production of weapons. Jai Hind.
Thank
Aditya,
you.
can I
Thank you.
add something? Can I say something here?
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Joyita. I think General KJ Singh has beautifully put it, the military component of how India can tackle the China challenge. But I think let me also add that there is a much larger, much imperceptible, much piecemeal Chinese influence which is creeping in India's neighborhood. That's largely commercial economic relationship. China has by now contracted about $150 billion in India's neighborhood. So I think that is where China's leverages are increasing much more. Of course, China-Pakistan defense relationship remains one of its kind, very unique. But every other neighbor is engaging China primarily because of the lower attraction of turnkey projects. And you heard General Rakesh Sharma saying how intensely and how expansively China's build-up in Tibet is happening to come and reach out to either Bhutan or Arunachal Pradesh or Nepal. So that's going to be a reality for us. And I don't think we then can think of either or only contesting China. You would remember till 2018, 19, we had already agreed to something the Chinese called 2+1 model, that China and India will come together and invest in third countries in South Asia, in India's neighborhood. Another interesting fact which all of you possibly remember, August of 2018, the Public Security Minister of China was in Delhi to sign intelligence sharing agreement. So India had reached a certain amount of balancing of coordination, co-option, also several C's of conflict and confrontation. So it has to be a whole spectrum of relationship where the flavor keeps changing week to week. And I think both the Ministries of Defense and the Foreign Affairs have to keep tab on which color is flaring up this week and sort of engage China from that perspective. So Nepal, as the question is not the only example. It applies to all of India's neighborhood. And if India doesn't engage China through these countries, you saw what happened to China-Nepal-India corridor. It's now China-Nepal corridor. China-Myanmar-India corridor is now China-Myanmar corridor. So these neighbors are going to be sucked in by the lure of economic prowess that China has. So India has to not be completely hands-off and burn all the bridges when it comes to China. That's not a smart policy. We will have to calibrate policy where we can maximize our advantages by engaging and contesting simultaneously, I think, which is what is happening in Nepal as well. If you notice, initially, because of whatever reasons, India did not talk to Nepal for a long time, and you saw how the speeches of Prime Minister Oli started changing the language. But now we are back to more or less normal, and you can see the tone down of Oli's speeches and references to India are very different now. So that is going to be a normal activity when Indian neighbors would sometime to placate China, would sort of ratchet up with India. We should not be too much disturbed with that because India's relations with India's neighbors are very different. They are not simply defense or commerce driven. They are geological relationships. I mean, I even dare say, not just geographical, historical, cultural, religious, people to people, linguistic, ethnic, whatever else. So I think we have to calibrate our policy, and government is doing that kind of change. You notice how Prime Minister, whenever he goes to Nepal, where does he go? He goes to all the religious sites, all the cultural sites. He remembers his visits to these cultural sites before. So it's a very different relationship that India is trying to build with India's neighbors. And if you look at it from that perspective, then India is not standing to lose. If you look at only narrow bandwidth of commercial contracts that China is doing versus India, then we look like losing out. But if you look at the whole spectrum of India's relations with Nepal, then it appears very different. Look at the number of Nepalese who are living in India, earning money in India. Look at Indians who are in Nepal. It's a very different relationship in that sense. So occasional supply of fuel to Nepalese disturbs sometimes our media here or our opinion makers once in a while, but that doesn't change anything on the ground to me. It's very piecemeal, gradual change which can be managed.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Singh. I think we have reached the end of the session. If I can make a quick point before we go into the next session. I think what we have not talked about today is the strategic importance of the Himalayas and how important the Himalayas are for China, specifically in terms of reasons of water. So China, if it wants, it also actually depends on the desperation of China to control the water resources of the Himalayas. And as long as China's desperation will continue, I think China will pose a huge threat for us. And there is no way that we can say that, no, we are not going into a war. There's not going to, there won't be a war. A kinetic conflict is always possible. I'm certain if someone wants to comment maybe on this, maybe for 2 minutes, if before we sign off, does anyone want to comment on this, Professor Singh or General Sahani, on the Himalaya aspect of it?
Yeah, I think Professor Swaran, I think it'd be good to hear you, and then I'll pip in, because I feel that there is a role and space for a kinetic engagement, and that's something which we should be prepared for. But I'll leave it at, I did flag that. Yeah, Professor Swaran Singh, I think let's hear him. It'll be good to hear his views.
You are mute. You're on mute, sir.
I was saying, no, I don't have to say, but it appeared that my hand made me feel that I'm trying to say something. Okay. I think Himalayas, again, are going to be extremely significant if you look at the kind of projects that Chinese are planning, not just of railways and roads, but now they have in 14th five-year plan decided to build a hydropower projects on the bend of Sangpo Jarlung on Brahmaputra on Indian side, which they are saying is going to be 3 times bigger than the Three Gorges Dam. I mean, this is crazy. You know, I don't understand how that kind of plan can be built on such a fragile geological system. So that kind of campaign needs to be raised at global level. That these are like global commons. I mean, this is going to impact not just India or Bangladesh, but fragile this whole talk of the multimodal Himalayan, trans-Himalayan corridor. I have always said to Chinese and to other people when I meet, this must not be a commercial project. This at best can be a cultural corridor for Buddhism to connect. Buddhism connects India, Nepal, Tibet fantastically. And this project must not go beyond becoming a cultural corridor, because anything beyond that is going to be disastrous and counterproductive. And I think that is something that we need to really bring much to light in all our campaigns around the world, that Himalaya is a fragile ecosystem, and Chinese are going right, left and center. And of course, they have not delivered as they planned. They have been going beyond their deadlines, but they are not stopping from thinking on these things. And now they're explaining it in terms of their achieving the net zero emissions by 2050. So they're saying we need these kind of projects to reach that, which is again for global good they're projecting. But I think that use of Himalayas, of all kind of cloud seeding, 5G towers, of these dams, of rails, Chinese are using it just like, you know, in 1950s, people used to say nuclear bomb is also one of the weapons which can be used in war, until we learned that it is so dangerous. It is non-use that is the use of nuclear weapons. Similarly, non-use of Himalayas is the real use for us. But I think that debate has to be, you know, sort of brought out much clearly, much convincingly to the Chinese, so that they stop doing what they're doing in Himalayas.
Can I just add one thing on this? I think from the climate change, I must share with you, you correctly said, global commons, eco-fragile system, very important as far as climate change and climate targets are maintained. Just to share with you, to bring down the pollution in Beijing for Beijing Olympics, they started cutting trees in Indonesia. And the loss of vegetation there finally last year showed increase in pollution levels in Beijing. So what I wanted to say was that today, whether it's the Arctic, whether it's the Amazon, whether it is the Himalayas, they are 10 to 15 critical hotspots from the climate change point of view. They have to be protected. Otherwise, the impact is going to be very, very widespread. The second issue is related to water requirement, freshwater resources. This is the great area. With global warming, temperatures going up, the melting of things are going to start creating problems. So I think other than the hazards of being in sensitive areas from the climate change and the IPCC, the COP26, which is coming up in Glasgow, these are very, very critical areas. I think that's the area where we really have to look at the Himalayas from. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, because the next session will start soon. And thank you for joining. And it was absolutely a riveting session.
Thank you.
On behalf of GCTC, I'm certain we will be having many more such sessions in future. Aditya, over to you now, please.
Thank you, Joyita. I would now request Major Amit Bansal to. Major Amit.
Yes, thank you, Aditya. In the first session, we heard some eminent speakers, and certain points were rightly brought out. The first of all was, we need to understand the Chinese motives in both in the form of military affairs as well as economic affairs, and need to have an alternative, need to have an alliance against China. We also need to refine and define rules of engagement against China. Even in the pandemic time, the way things have moved, it is already going in a favorable situation, but yes, we need to counter a lot. What Jan Hasnan rightly brought out is that events in the last 5 to 6 years have really compelled China to take India in a different perspective, to think India in a different perspective. There are certain things which have not happened in the last 30 years, but has happened. Certain things which were first. We were the first to counter China in such a way in the last 30 years. This is the first time when China has made incursions in so many places. It has never happened. Earlier it used to happen in 1 or 2 places. First time we have not withdrawn. We stood firm at our place. First time we retaliated. And first time we answered them in their own language. And it is the first time when we refused to accept the status quo. As the speakers rightly brought out, that the way China is developing their infrastructure in the border areas, we are quietly lagging behind on that. They're trying to encircle India by putting its stakes in Pakistan, putting its stakes in China, Nepal, putting its stakes in Sri Lanka, putting its stakes in Bangladesh. But somehow India needs to counter these motives. Most importantly is the Chinese propaganda. The Chinese propaganda, which is very, very common now, the way we have seen in today morning, I was seeing some of the newspapers where the cartoons have been bought on this G7 meet. So the way they are spreading the propaganda, it looks quite odd. Our boys have seen the way Chinese soldiers were staying at their places in South Pangongsu and all other areas. But the way propaganda was made, that drones will be delivering the hot food and all these things, all blah, blah, blah. So these propagandas need to be countered. We must not be happy to consider that we have won. There are many fronts to counter now. And as rightly brought out, that we have to reassess the qualitative and quantitative capacities of China into different spaces, not only the economic and the military space. The different spaces, different dimensions, we need to reassess China. We need to anticipate Chinese movements, and we have to, of course, economically, we need to reduce our dependence on China. So with this, we formally announce the end of the first session.